Hey guys, tonight we settle into a story that drifts like fine grains of sand across a quiet desert. You find yourself leaning back, breathing softly, letting your thoughts grow lighter than dust. We wander together into Judea, a land where time feels endless, where stone ridges glow under a pale moon, and where the silence holds more history than most libraries. It is a tale that begins long before you, long before me, and yet it unfolds slowly enough that you might forget the clock altogether. The Romans would have taxed you already, and frankly, you probably would not have survived their bread rations. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are here, share in the comments where you are listening from and what time of day it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You enter the Judean desert just as daylight melts away, leaving a pale silver glow that settles across the sand. The horizon widens like a calm breath, and the stillness encourages you to notice small things. The muted crunch of gravel beneath your steps, a cool thread of air brushing your skin, and the stars waiting quietly for their moment to appear. Nothing urges you forward. The desert has shaped its slopes and ridges over thousands of years, and it asks for no haste from you now. As you walk, memory drifts toward the year 63 before the Common Era, when Pompey the Great led his Roman legions into Jerusalem. That moment folded Judea into the reach of Rome, binding it to an empire restless with ambition. History keeps the record in hard lines, yet tonight you let it soften, like ink dissolving into water, leaving only faint echoes in the sand. Around you, the desert wind begins to rise. It stirs first as a whisper, then unravels in long, patient sighs. You pause listening, for the sound feels more than mere air. Old tales say that in this place, the wind sings. It threads itself through fissures in the cliffs and into the hollows of rock, shaping tones that resemble voices, half heard and drifting. You tilt your head and catch the suggestion of a lullaby carried across dunes, a song both soothing and strange. The night grows deeper, and ahead you glimpse Masada. It rises like a silent island above a pale sea of dust, a reminder that even the land can resist and endure. The path upward appears steep, yet you know the climb will come gently, each step slow and unhurried, as though time itself has laid out a carpet of stillness, inviting you to walk upon it without haste. You pause to take a breath. The air is thin but cool, carrying with it the minerals of the Dead Sea nearby. The taste is salty, almost metallic, like the aftertaste of a spoon you forgot to wash. You chuckle at the thought that the air itself could be seasoned. The desert gives you nothing fancy, but it never forgets to add flavor. Above, the stars emerge more boldly, one by one, until they fill the entire dome of the sky. You notice constellations flickering, and for a moment you imagine Roman soldiers lying on this very sand, trying to name the stars in Latin, while locals gave them Hebrew names, and everyone was probably wrong anyway. The heavens did not mind. They were too busy shining. The wind returns, soft at first, then gathering into a hum that sounds like a choir rehearsing a song without end. Each gust is a verse without words, a reminder that the desert holds countless stories it never fully reveals. Long ago, travelers said the wind carried voices of ancestors, while others claimed it was nothing more than air against stone. Whatever the truth, it feels like company, and you smile at the thought of the moon hiring its own singers. You lower yourself onto a flat stone, its surface still holding the day's warmth, slowly cooling into night. The stone feels ancient, yet welcoming, like an old friend inviting you to rest. You picture travelers, soldiers, and shepherds, once pausing here, brushing dust from sandals, whispering prayers, leaving behind silence you now share. You notice how the desert plays with scale. In daylight, everything stretches impossibly far. At night, the silence folds distance in half. The plateau of Masada feels both near and unreachable, as though it exists in two places at once, within reach of your hand, and yet only reachable by dreams. You wonder if this is what history feels like when you stop trying to study it and simply let it surround you. As you stand again, you let your pace slow further. Your steps are no longer steps but glides, as though the sand itself lifts your soles a little higher. You recall that Judea's transformation under Rome changed not only politics but daily life. Taxes, arisons, new rules, they all pressed down like heavy sandals on tender ground. But tonight those details are softened, blurred by moonlight. You are not living the empire. You are walking through its shadows. The wind rises again, brushing against your ears like a whisper. You tilt your head, and this time you hear it clearly. A tone so long and even that it almost resembles a single note from a flute. The desert is still, yet it plays its music for you. You think of it as nature's version of a sleep playlist, except this one does not need Wi-Fi. You smile at the thought, letting the desert humor lighten your heart. History can be heavy, but the desert insists on carrying it with featherweight patience. You walk on, noticing how your body relaxes with every breath, how your mind slows with each step. The sands of Judea whisper, not to rush, not to seek resolution, but to be content in the wandering. And so, under the wide and endless sky, you continue forward. The fortress of Masada waits, holding stories of kings, rebels, and choices carved into stone. But for now, it is enough to let the desert sing to you, a lullaby from ancient winds, carrying voices from long ago into the gentle quiet of tonight. The desert night continues to guide you, and with each quiet step, the plateau of Masada grows larger, more defined, until it rises before you like a massive stone ship anchored in an ocean of sand. It feels at once unyielding and strangely gentle, as though it has been waiting centuries for someone to notice its patient silhouette. The air carries a mild chill, brushing your skin with the same softness as linen drying in the breeze. You pause for a moment just to look. Masada is not in a hurry. Neither are you. The climb is slow, but slow is the point. Each step upward allows you to breathe a little deeper, letting your lungs fill with desert clarity. The stars overhead seem to rearrange themselves, offering encouragement like lanterns gently nudged into place. You sense that this fortress, though proud and towering, prefers to be approached with reverence, like an old storyteller who waits for you to sit comfortably before sharing memories. History tells us that between 37 and 31 before the Common Era, Herod the Great transformed Masada into a fortress of stone and strength. He did not settle for modest walls. He imagined a refuge that could outlast sieges, storms, and even despair itself. Under his command, workers carved, stacked, and anchored immense blocks, turning this plateau into a crown of stone above the desert. The result was both practical and symbolic, a reminder that even in the emptiest of places, human ambition insists on leaving its mark. You pause to imagine those workers. Perhaps they carried water jars balanced on shoulders, climbing the same slopes you now ascend, their sandals scuffing the same dust. The sun above them must have been merciless, yet the vision of Herod kept them moving, chiseling, hauling, shaping. Tonight, you walk in their traces, but without the burden of stone. Your only task is to breathe, to notice, to let your imagination wander. The path winds upward, and your hand trails along the wall, stone-shaped more than 2,000 years ago. Its surface feels uneven, yet it carries a warmth that seems to remember the touch of those who built it. You pause, comforted by the idea that stone can serve as both shield and friend. Though raised long ago to hold others at a distance, tonight the wall does not resist you. Instead, it opens itself quietly, as if inviting you deeper into its enduring calm. As you move deeper into the fortress, you notice recesses carved into the walls. Some are shallow, others deep, their purposes long debated. What captures your attention are the dark stains within them, traces of burning, blackened edges that resist explanation. Were these marks left from torches mounted long ago? Or could they be remnants of ancient rituals, ceremonies forgotten, but hinted at in smoke's shadow? The mystery lingers like incense, fragrant not in smell, but in curiosity. You lean closer, tracing the edge of one burn mark with your eyes. The stone holds no answers, but it does not need to. Its silence is as calming as a lullaby. The marks remain part of Masada's quiet secrets, waiting for each passerby to invent their own gentle story. Perhaps Herod's men lit fires here to chase away the night. Perhaps travelers whispered prayers to the flames. Or perhaps the desert itself, with its fierce winds, carried sparks that left their signature behind. Whatever the cause, the mystery is soft enough to rest upon. The fortress stretches in multiple directions, its walls rising and falling like the rhythm of steady breath. You walk through open courtyards where shadows pool in corners, then onto terraces where the desert horizon reveals itself again. From this height, the land looks endless, as though Masada floats above time itself. You sense how isolating and protective this place must have felt. Lonely, yes, but dignified in its solitude. The thought comforts you. Solitude here is not emptiness. It is the fullness of quiet, the richness of still air, the gift of hearing only your own soft footsteps. You let your body relax further, shoulders sinking, breath deepening, mind slowing into the steady cadence of history. The walls continue to stand, not out of stubbornness, but out of a kind of calm endurance. They have seen storms sweep the desert, seen empires rise and fade, yet they remain, not bragging, simply existing. You find yourself grateful for their patience. There is something soothing about stone that refuses to hurry. Another gust of wind drifts through the fortress, winding its way along corridors of stone. For a moment, it seems to thread itself through hidden recesses in the walls, shaping a faint and wandering whistle. The note lingers, fragile yet steady, as though the air itself has learned to sing. You smile at the thought that the desert choir has followed you here, rehearsing softly in Herod's grand amphitheater of rock. Whether the sound belongs to the fortress or only to your imagination, it rests gently in the silence, softening the vast space around you into calm companionship. You linger at the top of a stairway carved into the rock, gazing out at the desert far below. From here, the dunes look almost like waves frozen mid-crest. The stillness feels oceanic, and Masada its ship of stone, anchored forever, yet always ready to sail into memory. As you rest your hands on the parapet, you reflect that this fortress, built for war, has become instead a sanctuary of calm. Its walls no longer defend, but they shelter the wandering mind. They allow you to step away from the clamor of modern life and into the hush of antiquity. The burn marks, the stones, the silence, all of it combines into a tapestry woven for rest. And so, within the stillness of Masada's lonely heights, you pause and breathe. Each inhale gathers the dry sweetness of desert air, and each exhale releases the weight of hurried thoughts. The fortress, proud and solitary, rests around you like a patient guardian, shaped by centuries, yet never in a rush. Its stones seem to cradle your presence, offering shelter without expectation. Above, stars scatter themselves with quiet generosity, and the night asks for nothing more than your noticing. Here there are no alarms, no demands, only rock, starlight, and the gentle companionship of ancient silence. The fortress around you settles into silence, and yet you sense it is not finished telling its story. The stones hold memories, and tonight they choose to share them gently, like someone humming a tune while pouring tea. You walk along the upper walls, and the moonlight spreads across the plateau, silvering every surface. The horizon glimmers faintly, and far below, the Dead Sea reflects a shimmer like polished glass. It is here that the dream of Herod the Great takes form, echoing across centuries like a voice carried by the wind. Herod was a king who feared instability, and fear often builds monuments taller than ambition. Between 37 and 31 before the Common Era, he turned this rocky plateau into a retreat, a refuge, and most of all, a statement carved into the desert sky. The crown jewel of his vision was the northern palace, a three-tiered wonder clinging to the edge of the cliff. Imagine balconies of stone descending like steps of a grand staircase, each level gazing down at the glittering expanse of the Dead Sea. From above, a palace looked less like architecture and more like poetry frozen in stone. You imagine yourself standing on the upper terrace, as it must have been then, columns painted in rich hues, walls lined with plaster bright against the barren landscape. Below you, the second terrace offered open courtyards, and further down, the third stretched wide, a place for gatherings shaded by columns. Each level flowed into the next, as if the mountain itself wished to bow toward the salt waters shimmering beneath. Herod's builders carved cisterns into the rock, creating storage that could hold enough water to make the desert bloom. The channels they cut into the cliffs remain a marvel, even to modern eyes. Rainfall here is scarce, yet somehow they measured, angled, and guided it into these reservoirs with precision. Engineers today still pause and wonder, how did they calculate so accurately in a place where maps blurred into mirage? Some suggest ropes, others rudimentary surveying tools. Perhaps it was instinct, honed by generations of desert living. Whatever the method, the channels endure, carved with patience and cleverness that seems almost otherworldly. You picture water rushing through them, rare desert rains caught and delivered into vast cisterns. A sound would have been soothing trickles cascading into stone hollows, echoing softly like hidden fountains. In a land of silence, water was both treasure and song. Tonight, you imagine that sound returning, as though the channels are still waiting for the next rainfall, ready to hum their quiet lullaby once more. The thought brings you a calm smile. It is strange, isn't it, how much care was poured into comfort in a place so remote. Herod's palace was not only fortress, but retreat. From the shaded terraces, he could watch dawn unfold over the desert, each sunrise painting the cliffs in gold. He could stand at twilight as the Dead Sea shimmered purple and silver, and he could remind himself that power was fragile, but stone, at least, could pretend to endure forever. You pause to imagine the king himself, moving through these halls, his robes grazing the stone as he listened for the echo of his own steps. Perhaps he stood where you stand, gazing outward, the view stirring both pride and caution within him, always alert to the shadow of revolt or betrayal. Yet beyond his fears, something gentler remains. His vision, once bound to power, has softened with time into serenity, leaving behind a palace that now greets not soldiers, but dreamers like you. The desert air carries a faint trace of salt from the waters below. It lingers on your lips, reminding you of the vast body of water waiting quietly in the basin of the earth. The Dead Sea itself feels like part of Herod's design, a backdrop too magnificent to ignore. At night, the surface is perfectly still, mirroring stars so faithfully that the sky seems doubled above and below. You lean on an ancient wall, your hand brushing plaster worn smooth. In your mind, the colors return: reds, yellows, deep blues painted across columns, now faded but once vibrant. These splashes of life in the desert must have felt almost miraculous. You think of guests being led through the terraces, marveling at the baths, the storerooms, the wide halls echoing with footsteps. The palace whispered of power, but it also offered shelter, shade, and the luxury of cool water in a land where thirst is constant. It is not the grandeur that remains with you now, but something subtler. What lingers is the quiet ingenuity of hands that shaped this place, the patience of builders who carved stone, guided rain into hidden channels, and turned solitude into a kind of art. You sense their intention in every arch and terrace, a balance of strength and stillness. Even the faint burr marks you noticed earlier seem woven into that vision, hints of warmth, ritual, or light that once flickered against the night, softening the fortress with human presence. You wander through what remains of the northern palace, moving from terrace to terrace, as though walking through tiers of memory. The wind drifts across your shoulders, and you pause often, breathing, listening, noticing. The stone accepts your presence without judgment, as it has accepted countless wanderers before. Each step becomes softer, slower, until you feel more like a guest in Herod's dream than a traveler in time. The palace no longer holds kings, yet in its silence it offers you something gentler and far more lasting than power. It offers perspective, a quiet lesson carried by the air itself. The grand ambitions that once shaped these walls are softened now by centuries of wind, their edges worn smooth by time. What lingers here is not the fear that raised fortifications against imagined threats, but the calm that has settled within them. In this stillness, you discover that endurance often speaks more softly than conquest ever could. You sit on a ledge overlooking the Dead Sea, its vast stillness reflecting a sliver of moon. The terraces below step gracefully toward the horizon, and the night folds itself gently around you. Herod's dream whispers not of conquest now, but of rest. And you, in listening, allow yourself to sink deeper into that rest, carried by the same silence that has lingered here for 2,000 years. The palace terraces fade behind you, and you drift inward, deeper into the heart of the fortress. You walk through corridors carved in patience, your footsteps cushioned by silence that seems thicker here. The walls enclose not grandeur, but utility, though even utility feels sacred when it has endured centuries. These were the quiet chambers, spaces less dramatic than palaces, yet more essential to daily life. The air is cooler as you step into a long storage hall. The stones are plain, and the ceilings arch low, but here survival once lived. The rooms once held grain in great jars, sacks stacked against the walls, amphorae lined like soldiers waiting for command. Herod built them to last, and so they did. For years, even decades, these chambers offered enough supplies to feed hundreds. Grain for bread, oil for lamps and cooking, and wine for both ritual and relaxation. You imagine that wine was a comfort when desert nights pressed in a little too heavily, though perhaps not too much comfort. No one likes being tipsy in a fortress of sheer cliffs. It is soothing to picture the rhythm of life here. Servants or residents would come with baskets, filling them carefully, checking the levels of jars, brushing sand from lids. Each day unfolded in measured steps, without haste, because there was always time in the desert. A storage hall does not sound romantic, but there is a peace in its purpose: to keep hunger at bay, to light a lamp, to pour a cup of wine when evening called for quiet company. One of the most curious discoveries in these chambers still amazes archaeologists today. Among the remnants of grain and oil, seeds of dates were found, preserved for more than 2,000 years. Some were tested, and astonishingly, a few still sprouted when planted. Imagine the patience of a seed sleeping through empires, waiting longer than entire civilizations, then unfurling its green shoots as though no time had passed. If seeds can wait 2 millennia, you can probably wait until tomorrow to check your emails. The thought lingers with you as you pass from one chamber to another. The air smells faintly of dust and earth, but if you close your eyes, you can almost sense the aroma of olive oil, the sweetness of wine, the nutty fragrance of grain being ground. Daily life must have had its gentle rhythms, baking, storing, mending jars, sweeping the floors. Each act carried weight, not in drama, but in continuity. To wake and to tend to the storerooms was a way of saying, "We will live another day." You pause in front of a broken amphora, its fragments resting where they fell centuries ago. The curve of its clay suggests it once held something precious, but now it holds only air. Even so, the shape itself speaks. Of potters who turned clay on spinning wheels, of hands smoothing wet surfaces, of fire hardening the vessel. Each shard still glows faintly in the light, like an old lamp refusing to go out. The storerooms stretch on, lined with niches and alcoves, some scorched faintly by fire. You cannot know whether the burns came from torches, from ritual, or from later destruction. Yet the marks look almost like shadows of flames, preserved as art in the stone. It is easy to imagine them dancing across walls, while jars of grain stood silent, like an audience too polite to interrupt. Here in the fortress, life must have balanced between vigilance and routine. Outside, the desert stretched vast and empty, and perhaps danger seemed always possible. Inside, however, there was bread to bake, lamps to light, wine to pour, and seeds, quiet seeds waiting to become trees. The human heart, after all, does not live on fear alone. It rests in the ordinary, in the gentle repetition of daily tasks. As you imagine this, you notice the faint way sound behaves in these halls. A single cough or laugh would ripple softly, bouncing from wall to wall, as though the stone wished to join in. It must have been comforting, this resonance, because it made every small sound less lonely. Even silence here feels companionable, wrapping you in a blanket of stone and time. You wander further and sit for a moment on a low ledge. A shaft of light enters through a crack, dust motes swirling like stars in miniature. The stillness is so complete that you begin to sense your own breathing is part of the story, rising and falling in rhythm with the chambers. The air itself seems to remember countless other breaths, layered gently like notes in a song. The seeds found here remind you that life always looks for an excuse to return. Even in long silence, the possibility of renewal waits patiently. Perhaps that is the secret these storerooms whisper, that survival is not just stockpiling jars, but trusting in the quiet resilience of small things. If a date seed can rise again after centuries, maybe your own tired mind can rise tomorrow after sleep tonight. You stand, brush invisible dust from your hands, and continue along the chamber's length. Shadows stretch into corners, soft and unthreatening, like folds of a great cloak. You think about how people once trusted these supplies to keep them safe, to see them through sieges, to keep hunger away from their doors. And you realize that the comfort you feel now, walking slowly, is not so different from the comfort they must have felt, an awareness that within these walls, life could be sustained. At last, you step back into the open air, pausing at the threshold as if to honor the silence behind you. The chambers you leave are no longer filled with jars or grain, but with the softer cargo of echoes, whispers, and stories. They remain in the stone, waiting for those willing to listen. Ahead spreads the plateau, wide and hushed, a canvas ready to receive the next memory laid upon it. The desert wind greets you again, rising with a delicate note that almost resembles a song. It is not a hurried tune, nor one seeking an ending. Instead, it drifts across the vastness, lingering on each breath of air. You smile, realizing the song will wait as long as it must, and so, with quiet patience, will you? You leave the quiet chambers behind, carrying with you the smell of clay jars and the whisper of seeds. Outside, the plateau stretches wide, and the wind feels different, now less like the echo of kings, and more like the murmur of footsteps long gone. For Masada's story is not only about palaces and storerooms. It is also about those who came later, bringing with them their own fears, their own hopes, and their own strange traces. In the year 66 of the Common Era, Judea rose against Rome. It was a desperate attempt, filled with courage, but also weighted with inevitability. Rome's legions, disciplined and vast, pressed hard against the rebellion. Cities fell one after another. Jerusalem itself became a place of siege and fire. From that chaos, some fled, and among them were the Sicarii, a radical branch of the Zealots. They carried their knives, their determination, and their families, and they sought a place where Rome's hand could not easily reach. They found it here at Masada. You picture their arrival, not as a clash of swords, but as a hushed procession. A line of weary figures crossing the desert, children clutched to their mothers, bundles strapped to tired shoulders, faces etched with fatigue, yet burning with resolve. The fortress, weathered but unbroken, must have appeared as a promise. Its cisterns, storerooms, and walls offered not comfort, but the chance to endure, and sometimes the chance is comfort enough. Here, the Zealots shaped a life stripped bare of grandeur. They were not kings, nor builders of palaces, but families carving refuge from stone and silence. Days stretched slowly, fires tended, grain ground, children taught, eyes fixed on the horizon. You could almost hear the rasp of tools, the low murmur of voices, the rhythm of persistence against empire. Archaeologists later uncovered fragments of pottery left behind by these inhabitants. Many were ordinary, the remains of bowls, jars, and cups. Yet on some pieces, faint inscriptions appear, scratched by hand with uncertain strokes. Some look like names, as though marking ownership. Others resemble codes or symbols, perhaps ways of dividing rations or assigning tasks. Their meaning remains uncertain, locked within the clay. It is a strange thought that the secret thoughts of families, recorded in fragments, now lie scattered for strangers to puzzle over 2,000 years later. You imagine one shard being passed around. This is yours, this portion, this share. A small act, but one that made life manageable. The inscriptions whisper of intimacy, of individuals trying to hold on to order in a world collapsing outside their walls. In a way, they remind you of the little labels you might put in your own kitchen, dividing jars of sugar, flour, or tea. Even rebels and warriors still had to decide whose turn it was to fetch water, whose portion of bread belonged to whom. History can be grand, but daily life is always small, detailed, and familiar. As you wander the plateau, you imagine the Zealots moving slowly about their tasks. Some repairing walls, others tending fires, others teaching their children, letters scratched on shards of pottery. The desert wind carried away their voices, yet the silence today still feels shaped by them. Every stone seems to have absorbed their presence, as though the fortress itself leaned forward to listen. The Sicarii were feared by some in their own time, known for their daggers and their ruthless commitment. But here, on this plateau, they were more than their reputation. They were parents, siblings, children. They brought with them laughter and arguments, the clatter of bowls, the rustle of woven cloth. Life inside Masada was not a legend, but a sequence of ordinary hours. That ordinariness feels almost more powerful than their politics. You find yourself pausing near the northern edge, where the view spills endlessly toward the Dead Sea. Imagine standing guard here, eyes sweeping across the barren land, heart tightening at the thought of Roman banners in the distance. Yet for most days, the horizon must have been empty, the silence stretching without interruption. Perhaps it was in those quiet hours that the fortress felt most like home. The fragments of pottery remind you again of something universal. Across centuries, across cultures, people mark their belongings, divide their rations, keep track of who gets what. The marks may look mysterious to outsiders, but to those who wrote them, they were simple, practical, necessary. It is almost amusing to think that archaeologists debate their meaning, while the writer might simply have been saying, "This one's mine." The sun lowers in your mind's eye, spreading copper light across the walls. You imagine families gathering together in small rooms, meals shared, children leaning sleepily against their parents. The Zealots may have carried sharp knives and fierce determination, but they also carried tenderness, humor, and fatigue. Even rebels have to wash dishes. Even warriors have to mend clothing. Life at Masada was not only defiance, but also survival, and survival always includes the most ordinary gestures. You sit for a moment on a stone, letting the thought wash over you. How much of history is built not on battles, but on bowls and bread? How much of memory rests not in speeches, but in scribbles on pottery? The Zealots arrived with their ideals, but what they left behind are fragments of daily life, softened by time into something almost gentle. The night begins to fall again in your imagination. Stars creep into the desert sky, and the fortress lies quiet once more. The Zealots are long gone, but the echoes of their arrival remain. Their footsteps blend into the wind, their inscriptions linger in clay, their stubborn persistence seeps into the stone. And as you breathe slowly, you feel a kinship not with warriors or rebels, but with people simply trying to live, to feed their families, to mark their share of bread in a world that often gave them none. The fortress accepts their memory with the same patience it gives to you now. It holds their presence gently, without judgment, offering their story as softly as the wind offers its song. You rise again, walking slowly, knowing that Masada is no longer only Herod's dream, but also the Zealots' refuge. And in this layered silence, you let yourself rest, carrying forward the faint inscription of their lives. The desert is never fully silent, though at night it often feels that way. Standing on the plateau, the air cools against your skin, the heat of the day fading into memory. The sky above Masada deepens into velvet, scattered with stars so numerous, they seem like grains of salt poured carelessly across a dark surface. The fortress, once full of voices, now rests under that endless canopy, and you find yourself breathing slower, as though the night itself were teaching you to be calm. Masada's position was not chosen by accident. From this height, the land opens in every direction. To the east lies the Dead Sea, still and reflective, glowing faintly even in darkness. To the west stretch rugged valleys and winding paths, each one visible from above. For those who once stood guard here, the view was more than beauty. It was protection. Any movement dust rising from marching feet, the flicker of a torch, could be spotted from far away. In times of unrest, this high vantage was as valuable as 100 soldiers. Imagine the Zealots, or Herod's men before them, taking their posts along the walls. The night wind brushing their cloaks, eyes straining into the distance. Some may have felt loneliness. Others, a strange kind of peace. Watching over such vastness might have been both a burden and a comfort. You cannot help but feel that same duality now. The land is both empty and alive, silent yet whispering. The Dead Sea in moonlight is its own kind of wonder. Unlike other bodies of water, it does not ripple in the same way. Its heavy salt makes it hold stillness, as though it prefers reflection to movement. When the moon climbs high, its light spreads across the surface in silvery bands. Travelers have long spoken of a curious sight on certain nights, the glow stretching into a narrow path, as if the sea itself were drawing a line straight toward Masada. A silver road, leading directly to the fortress on the cliff. You pause in thought, letting the image take shape. The desert below is dark, but from this height, the silver path seems real enough to follow, shimmering gently, like a quiet invitation. No one knows why it happens only sometimes, or why the path seems so precise. Some said it was the fortress calling out, a sign from heaven guiding weary wanderers toward refuge. Others whispered it was a trick, a warning instead, as if the moonlight were pointing to the very place Rome would one day march to claim. Whether omen or blessing, the effect must have lingered in memory for all who saw it. Imagine a sentry, weary with hours of watch, glancing east and finding the sea transformed into a ribbon of light. For a moment, the world would have seemed touched by mystery, larger than the ordinary rhythm of guarding, waiting, enduring. Even now, you can feel how such a vision might settle in the heart like a dream you cannot explain. The stillness around you deepens. Night insects sing softly in hidden corners, but the plateau itself remains steady, as if it too were holding watch. The fortress becomes less stone and more presence, blending into the rock beneath, becoming part of the desert itself. Looking out, you sense how those who lived here might have drawn strength, not only from walls and storerooms, but also from the sheer vastness of the view. When the world seems to end in silence and stars, you cannot help but feel both small and protected. You step slowly along the edge of the wall, imagining the countless feet that once traced the same path. Sentries trading places, leaning on spears, whispering brief words before sinking into silence again. Perhaps they told each other stories to stay awake, or pointed to constellations above. Perhaps they, too, noticed the moon's strange path on the water and wondered what it meant. Human questions do not change much across centuries. We still look at light in darkness and search for meaning. The stars continue their patient glow. You notice Orion rising, his belt bright and sharp, the hunter forever chasing across the sky. The Zealots may have known different names for these stars, but their wonder would have been the same. Nights on the plateau stretched long. It was time enough to learn the sky, to let its patterns sink into memory. The heavens offered both guidance and comfort, their eternal cycles reminding those below that some things endure beyond empire, beyond war. The fortress, meanwhile, kept its duty. From here, a watchman could spot movement days before it arrived. A plume of dust, a flicker of firelight, these tiny signals would travel across the land and reach the eyes of those who waited. In that way, Masada was more than a refuge. It was a silent guardian, always alert, always high above the reach of surprise. Yet the mysterious moonpath across the Dead Sea reminds you that not all advantages can be measured in strategy. Some are felt in the heart. Perhaps, for those who lived here, the vision of a glowing silver road brought courage, a reminder that even in isolation, they were part of something vast and luminous. Perhaps it offered hope on nights when food seemed low or fear pressed close. In its shimmering silence, the sea gave them a kind of unspoken promise that beauty still existed, even in struggle. You sit once more on the ancient stone, letting the desert night fold around you. The wind is cool, carrying no voices now, only its own steady breath. Above, the stars shine with patient clarity. Below, the sea glows faintly, holding its secrets in quiet reflection. And within you, a deep calm begins to settle, as if you, too, are part of this endless watch. The Zealots are gone, their voices dissolved into the desert wind. The Romans, once so certain of conquest, are nothing more than lines in history. Yet the sky still spreads its quiet canopy, the sea still mirrors the moon, and the fortress endures, steadfast against time. The watch it keeps is no longer of soldiers, but of memory, of imagination, of your own attentive gaze. You close your eyes and follow the pale silver path inward toward rest, toward dreams, toward a stillness as wide and timeless as the desert sky. The desert has always known patience. Centuries pass like a long exhale, and even events of great noise eventually fall into silence. So it was in the year 73 of the Common Era, when Lucius Flavius Silva, a Roman governor and general, led his forces eastward, toward the quiet plateau of Masada. What is now a silent ruin was once the stage of the empire's resolve, yet even then, the beginning came softly, like footsteps in sand. The Roman army arrived not with sudden storm, but with steady rhythm. Their banners caught the desert sun, their armor glinted faintly, and the dust of their march rose in slow curls that could be seen from the fortress above. For the Zealots watching from the walls, this movement must have felt both inevitable and strangely distant, like a tide far out at sea beginning to roll inward. From above, the plateau revealed everything. One could see the Dead Sea stretched to the east, shimmering even under a pale haze. To the west and south, the valleys opened wide, and in those valleys, the Romans began their work. Stone by stone, trench by trench, they laid out the first lines of encirclement. Masada was not attacked in haste. It was surrounded with patience. The most curious legacy of this effort remains visible even now, the faint outline of a wall that once wrapped nearly 3 kilometers around the base of the mountain. Built of local stone, it served as both barrier and signal, declaring that no one within would escape unnoticed. Yet archaeologists have puzzled over a certain gap in this circuit, a broken section where the wall simply stops. Was it the hand of nature, eroding over centuries? Or was it intentional an entrance, perhaps, or a place abandoned before completion? No one knows for certain. The stones give no clear answer, only a quiet invitation to wonder. And so the Romans waited. Camps rose in neat formations, their order contrasting with the rugged landscape. From above, the Zealots could see the geometry of empire taking shape, squares and lines, tents in careful rows, fires lit at regular intervals. To stand on the walls at dusk was to watch two worlds reflecting each other's stone fortress against canvas camp, silence against murmured Latin, faith against discipline. Yet all of it unfolded at a pace slow enough to feel almost meditative. The fortress did not respond with noise or alarm. Its walls remained steady, its gates closed. Within, life continued bread-baked, lamps lit, seeds perhaps still waiting in jars. Above the desert, the plateau held its breath, while below, the Romans wrote their own message in earth and rock. We are here, and we will not leave. Some historians still question whether the siege of Masada was ever truly necessary. The fortress stood remote on its desert plateau, far from the bustling centers of the empire. Its defenders were few, more symbolic than threatening, and its strategic value was meager when weighed against the vast territories Rome already controlled. Was the decision to march here driven by pride, a desire to extinguish every ember of rebellion, or simply the need to conclude a campaign without loose ends? Perhaps it was a message more than a military act, a demonstration that Rome would tolerate no defiance, no matter how small. And yet, a question remains unsettled, lingering in the silence around these ruins, like a faint echo carried on desert winds, an echo that refuses to offer a clear answer, and perhaps never will. As night descended, the sight from the fortress must have been strangely beautiful. Small fires glowing in the Roman camps, scattered like constellations across the valley floor. Smoke rising in soft spirals, vanishing into a star-thick sky. The walls of Masada cast long shadows in moonlight, and the Dead Sea mirrored pale silver on its surface. If not for the knowledge of conflict, one might have mistaken it all for a festival unfolding in the distance. The Romans worked with rhythm, carving ramps, gathering stone, marking paths upward. But their movements were patient, like sculptors chipping away at a statue that would not emerge for many months. Siege was not a matter of sudden violence here. It was a matter of time, of watching and waiting, of building lines in earth until the fortress itself seemed to be slowly absorbed into the empire's design. Inside, the Zealots surely watched from their chambers, peering from high terraces, speaking in low tones by lamplight. Perhaps they, too, felt the strange calm of inevitability. Or perhaps they trusted that the fortress, with its stores of food and water, would keep them safe for as long as it needed. The walls had endured for decades already. Why should they not endure against Rome itself? You stand now in imagination on the same wall, looking down upon the valley. The Roman wall still traces its path in faint stone, curling like a necklace around the base of the mountain. The broken section catches your attention again. It is just a gap, and yet it seems to hold more weight than the rest. A reminder that history does not always explain itself, that some silences are intentional. The desert wind passes across the plateau, stirring grains of sand, carrying the faint memory of ancient voices. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the steady sound of hammers striking stone, of soldiers speaking softly in Latin, of footsteps pacing through camps below. Yet when you open them again, all is still. The siege has long ended, the soldiers long returned to dust. Only the stones remain, marking the patience of a campaign begun not with fury, but with silence. Masada's story was never one of quick storms. It was always about endurance, about time stretching across years and centuries. The siege, too, began as part of this slow rhythm. The desert absorbed the sound, the sky watched without judgment, and the fortress stood steady as the world rearranged itself around it. And so, even in recounting an act of war, what you feel most is not urgency, but stillness. The Romans surrounded, the Zealots watched, and the desert carried on, vast and timeless. In that balance of waiting, the story settles, ready to drift into the next chapter, like the slow turning of stars above the plateau. The desert teaches a kind of patience that feels endless. Beneath the vast sky, every grain of sand seems content to rest exactly where it has fallen, waiting centuries before shifting again. Into this stillness, the Roman engineers brought their vision, practical yet strangely poetic. They began to build a ramp of stone and dust that would eventually reach the high walls of Masada. It was not an act of haste, but of calculation, of measuring distance and gathering material in rhythms as steady as the beating of a drum, heard far away. You imagine the soldiers at dawn, bending to pick up stones warmed from yesterday's sun. Each rock, each clump of earth, carried by hand or basket, became part of a larger pattern. Step by step, the slope rose higher, creeping upward along the western side of the plateau. This ramp, built not for beauty but for purpose, was itself a kind of monument. It grew from the desert floor like a man-made ridge, a slow extension of the mountain's own body. Historical accounts tell us that the Roman army, under Silva's command, relied heavily on the labor of enslaved people and soldiers alike to complete this colossal effort. Day after day, they hauled stone from nearby quarries, piling layer upon layer, compressing the earth with wooden tools, stamping with sandals until dust clung to their skin. In the heat, the ramp became both workplace and punishment, yet also, from a distant perspective, a remarkable feat of endurance. If you close your eyes, you might picture the scene as a strange harmony between human will and natural form. The mountain stood tall, aloof, yet the Romans coaxed a new path onto its side, as if sketching a stairway in slow motion. The work was steady, almost hypnotic. Dust floated upward in soft plumes, catching light, turning golden, then settling again. The air would have been filled with the sound of shuffling feet, clinking stone, and perhaps even the soft murmur of orders spoken in Latin. What fascinates archaeologists today are the details buried within that ramp. Among the neat layering of rocks and packed earth, there are sections where the stones do not quite match, where older fragments appear to have been placed without uniformity. These pieces seem as though they once belonged to another structure, perhaps long-forgotten ruins nearby, repurposed for Rome's need. It raises the quiet suggestion that the ramp is not only a Roman achievement, but also a collage of earlier histories, folded together in the name of conquest. Standing at Masada now, you can still trace the ramp's silhouette against the slope. Though weathered by centuries, its shape remains clear. It is less a ruin than a scar, stretching upward in patient defiance of time. To walk beside it is to feel the persistence of human hands long gone, to sense how determination once carved itself into the desert's fabric. It does not shout. It simply rests, waiting to be noticed, like the faint crease in a page of memory. The defenders above must have watched with an odd mixture of awe and apprehension. From the walls, they could see the ramp grow taller each week, closer each month. Yet the process was so gradual that it may have felt unreal, as though the mountain itself was reshaping beneath their eyes. One day the slope was low, another day it had risen, and soon it seemed the Romans were walking not only through the valley, but climbing into the sky. Evenings arrived, wrapped in a quiet that felt almost deliberate. The sinking sun painted the desert in wide strokes of rose, gold, and fading amber, while the ramp, unfinished yet undeniable, draped across the slope like an artist's mark left upon stone. In the Roman camps below, fires flickered into life, their glow scattering shadows that stretched and merged with the gathering night. High above, the Zealots lit their own small lamps, their flames trembling but steady. Perhaps in that twilight stillness, the ramp ceased to appear solely as a weapon. It seemed instead like something older, inevitable, an extension of the desert itself, as though the land had always meant for such a path to exist. Time during a siege bends and shifts. For the soldiers laboring below, each day dissolved into the next, the ceaseless act of hauling stone after stone creating a rhythm that dulled thought and blurred memory. Sweat, dust, and repetition became their calendar. For those within the fortress, time moved differently, hours drawn thin, stretched across the horizon as they watched the slow but relentless growth of the ramp inching upward. What seemed endless above was steady progress below. The ramp was more than earth and rock. It became the measure of waiting, the shape of days, the passage of time itself. The strangeness is this: what was once forged for conquest now stirs quiet awe. You think of the countless stones hauled upward, the rhythm of labor, the discipline of so many hands moving in unison. In that effort, the ramp becomes something more than strategy. It is almost a poem pressed into dust, its verses wordless, its lines unreadable, yet its message clear enough. Persistence has the power to carve paths through silence, and even reshape the bones of mountains. As night winds drift over the desert today, they carry whispers along the ramp's slope. Some say that if you stand still, you can hear faint echoes, the imagined sound of stones tumbling into place, or perhaps the sighs of those who carried them. Whether this is memory or illusion does not matter. The ramp remains, bridging the human and the eternal, dust and stone, aligned for a purpose long since faded. The Romans raised it stone by stone, their purpose clear and unwavering. From above, the defenders watched its slow ascent with a mix of dread and weary vigilance. Yet the desert itself offered no opinion. It simply held the weight, receiving the ramp as it would any other scar upon its surface. Now, centuries removed from fear and struggle, you stand before it and feel not the tension of battle, but the quiet hush of time's embrace. What was once menace is now stillness. The ramp does not advance, does not threaten, it only rests, a ribbon of stone and dust, lying patiently beneath the vast and indifferent sky, part of the desert's unbroken memory. Time has a way of stretching in the desert, unspooling like a ribbon caught in a steady wind. During the long siege of Masada, this truth must have felt especially clear. Months passed without decisive action, only the slow accumulation of days. To those inside the fortress and those camped below, life became less about battles and more about waiting. Waiting for weather to change, waiting for stone to shift, waiting for the silence to answer dot from the high walls. The defenders gazed outward across the valley, watching the Roman camps glow faintly at night. They were arranged in neat squares, their order unbroken, their fires lit with regularity. Yet weeks turned into months, and the pattern grew so familiar that it must have blended into the scenery, as predictable as the rising of the moon. The Romans remained, but they did not rush. The fortress remained, and it did not falter. The desert between them absorbed the tension, smoothing sharp edges into quiet monotony. Within the walls of Masada, provisions waited like silent guardians of survival. Herod's careful planning had stocked the storerooms with grain, oil, and wine, preserved against the unknown. For the Zealots, these supplies were more than food, they were time itself, stretched and secured. Bread still rose in the ovens, oil lamps cast their warm glow, and water trickled from cisterns shaped by ancient hands. Though confined within stone boundaries, life unfolded with a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, sustained by foresight and the desert's rare generosity. What surprises modern scholars is not simply that food remained, but how much of it endured beyond centuries. Archaeologists uncovered jars sealed with care, their contents still identifiable. Among them The discovery of honey stands out as especially remarkable. Within clay vessels, thick traces of darkened honey clung to the sides, hardened yet recognizable, carrying a sweetness preserved by time itself, even after 2,000 years. Honey's natural resilience allowed it to survive almost unchanged. To imagine such jars resting quietly through centuries is to sense the patience of both nature and history. One can almost picture the defenders spreading that honey on fresh bread, savoring a taste of comfort in an environment otherwise marked by stone and dust. The golden substance, sticky and enduring, was not merely food but symbol proof that some things resist decay, that sweetness can outlast hardship. In the stillness of the siege, perhaps the honey gave more than nourishment. It may have given reassurance. The days rolled forward with a peculiar sameness. Morning sun poured over the plateau, casting long shadows that shifted slowly across stone floors. The air warmed, cicadas hummed faintly, and voices echoed through chambers where families gathered. Children, perhaps unaware of the full gravity of events, may have played with pebbles or scraps of pottery, their laughter carried softly by the wind. Adults tended to daily needs, repairing tools, weaving, preparing meals. Each action was both ordinary and extraordinary, performed under the weight of siege, yet without the urgency of collapse. For those in the Roman camps, time moved differently, but with equal slowness. Soldiers woke at dawn, drilled, carried water, hauled stone. Some labored on the great ramp, others patrolled the perimeter. Yet even with such tasks, the repetition must have dulled their senses, the desert heat drawing out the hours until days blurred together. They watched the fortress, and the fortress watched them, neither side moving decisively, both bound by the desert's endless patience. When night came, the air cooled, and stars spilled across the sky in brilliant scatter. The Dead Sea reflected pale light, smooth as glass. Fires in the camps below flickered like scattered constellations, mirrored by lamps glowing faintly on the plateau above. It was as though the entire landscape had become a mirror, sky and earth echoing one another in silence. In such moments, one imagines both Romans and Zealots drifting into quiet reflection. Perhaps some soldier, lying on the desert floor, traced constellations with his eyes, wondering about his distant home. Perhaps a zealot, sitting within the fortress, leaned against cool stone and listened to the wind. The siege was not only about survival or strategy. It was also about endurance of thought, the way the mind meanders when time refuses to hurry. The honey jars remind us that endurance can be sweet. Even as stone crumbled and walls weathered, even as lives shifted and ended, something as simple as honey persisted. Its presence offers a tangible connection, a small but vivid bridge across time. You imagine opening one of those jars, the faint scent of sweetness rising, as though the past itself had left a trace of comfort for the present. And so the waiting stretched on, a quiet thread weaving month into month, season into season. Each sunrise seemed a mirror of the one before, each sunset a gentle copy in softer tones. The Romans kept building, stone upon stone, their rhythm steady and unbroken. The zealots within the walls tended fires, ground their grain, and taught their children, carrying on with life as if eternity itself had slowed. Around them, the desert stood still, vast, and patient, asking nothing, offering only silence. In the end, waiting was not absence, but presence, shaping hearts more deeply than any clash of swords. From your place in imagination, you walk slowly along the inner chambers of Masada. The stone floors are cool beneath your feet, the air heavy with quiet. In the corner, a sealed jar rests, its surface etched with time. You run a hand along it, feeling faint ridges of clay, sensing the centuries it has endured. You lift the lid, and though the contents have hardened, you catch the faint glimmer of honey's persistence. Sweetness remains, even in silence. Above you, the sky begins to pale, promising another day exactly like the last. You breathe deeply, taking in the rhythm of waiting, the patience of both stone and dust. The long wait is not burden but meditation, a reminder that even in times of siege, life finds ways to continue quietly, gently, as enduring as honey resting in jars of clay. Water is life, especially in a land where the sun reigns without mercy. In the barren desert that surrounds Masada, the presence of water was not just comfort but survival. And yet, upon this isolated plateau, the people of ancient Judea found a way to harness what the skies occasionally granted. They transformed rainfall into lifeblood, shaping the fortress into a place of improbable endurance. Masada was not only a stronghold of stone, it was a miracle of engineering. Along the cliffs, carved into the rock itself, were vast cisterns, great chambers designed to catch and store the rare, precious rains that swept through the region. Channels ran like veins along the mountainside, guiding torrents of water from sudden desert storms into these deep cavities. There, the water rested, shielded from sun and wind, held in patience until the day it was needed. For those who lived upon Masada, the cisterns were silent guardians. Even in the longest sieges, they ensured survival, holding enough to quench thirst, to cook food, to bathe in small measure, and to keep lamps filled with steam for cleaning. When the desert outside withered and cracked, within the fortress life remained steady, nourished by what lay hidden underground. The scale of this system still astonishes. Some cisterns could hold tens of thousands of cubic meters of water. Standing within one feels less like entering a human structure and more like stepping into a cavern sculpted by nature itself. Their walls rise high, curved and echoing. A single drop of water, falling, would resound like music. In times of plenty, the cisterns brimmed like secret lakes beneath the fortress. Invisible yet essential. Archaeologists who studied these cisterns found not only remnants of moisture, but also something stranger. Along the walls of certain chambers, mineral deposits had formed patterns, delicate swirls and loops of white and ochre. They traced shapes like whirlpools, spirals frozen in stone. To some, these were simply the natural result of water and time, the slow alchemy of minerals settling as the liquid evaporated. Yet others noted their symmetry, their elegance, as though shaped by currents more forceful than rain alone. The desert does not often grant whirlpools. Water there falls suddenly and violently, sweeping down wadis in fierce floods, but once captured in cisterns, it usually lies still. How then did such spirals come to mark the stone? Was it chance, or did some hidden mechanism, perhaps a funnel of wind, perhaps an ancient practice now forgotten, create motion strong enough to inscribe these patterns? The answer drifts like mist, present, visible, but never held. Standing within a cistern, you sense the coolness that once filled it, a chamber alive with water. The air feels damp, carrying the faint memory of stone brushing against liquid. In flickering lamplight, ripples would have shimmered, and echoes answered the voices of children, leaning curiously over the edge. Adults drew buckets, lifting the quiet gift of survival. Over centuries, minerals traced soft spirals across the walls, marks of time's hidden hand. For the Zealots, these depths offered calm assurance. While Romans waited beyond the fortress, thirst could not claim them. Each drop was proof that endurance was possible. And yet, even survival takes on a rhythm. To lower a jar by rope, to draw up water glistening in the dim light, to pour it carefully into smaller vessels, these acts became ritual. The creak of rope, the splash of liquid, the echo in cavernous space, all repeated day after day. In this way, life in the fortress flowed like the water itself, patient, cyclical, sustaining. Today, when visitors walk through Masada's remains, they may stand within these empty cisterns, Their vastness humbles the imagination. You tilt your head upward and see walls stretching high above, marked by those mysterious spirals. The stone holds the memory of water even when none is present. In silence, you can almost hear the sound of rushing streams filling channels. The distant thunder of a storm, miles away, suddenly captured. Transformed into calm reservoirs. There is a kind of serenity in knowing that. Thousands of years ago, people mastered patience in partnership with nature. They did not fight the desert, but learned to wait for its brief generosity. They caught what came and preserved it. The cisterns are not merely structures. They are lessons in trust that the clouds would someday return. Trust that careful planning could transform scarcity into abundance. As you imagine yourself wandering deeper into one of these cisterns. The air feels cool despite the desert sun above. You run your hand along the wall, tracing the ridges of mineral deposits. The spiral forms guide your fingers in circles, endless loops that mirror the cycles of time itself. You wonder if those who first noticed them also paused in quiet awe, or if they saw only utility, leaving wonder for future eyes. The spirals, unexplained, give the cisterns a voice. They speak of movement in a place meant for stillness, of mystery in a structure meant for clarity. They remind us that water is not only necessity, but also symbol of force capable of shaping stone, of leaving beauty even where function ruled. Above the cisterns, the fortress continues to rest against the desert sky. Below, the memory of water lingers in shadowy chambers. And in your mind, you carry the image of spirals, delicate and eternal, carved not by hand, but by time and mystery. When you breathe in deeply, it feels as though the coolness of those cisterns fills you too, calming your thoughts, easing the heat of day. The desert outside may roar with silence, but within there is a quiet stream, unhurried, eternal. The water once sustained life, but even now, long gone, it sustains imagination. In the spirals on the stone, you find not answers, but rest. A reminder that even in the driest places, beauty and endurance flow together. And so, Masada's cisterns remain vast, silent, echoing, holding not just water, but the memory of survival, the patience of centuries, and the gentle whisper that life always finds a way. Among the many stones of Masada, where walls rise against the desert sky and cisterns lie deep in the rock, there are also traces of a quieter treasure words. Long after the fortress had fallen silent, buried in dust and rubble, fragments of parchment were uncovered. These were not ordinary scraps. They were the remains of sacred texts, ancient scrolls that carried with them the echo of voices once lifted in prayer and study. In the 20th century, archaeologists carefully brushed the sands away and found Hebrew manuscripts. They were worn and fragile, their letters faded by centuries, yet still legible enough to recognize. Passages of the Hebrew Bible, words that had shaped a people, lay hidden for nearly 2,000 years, and then returned to light. The discovery linked Masada not only to stone and water, but also to the realm of thought, of spirit, of memory preserved on fragile parchment. The presence of these scrolls reveals that life in the fortress was not merely about survival. It was also about meaning. Within those walls, surrounded by desert silence, people gathered to read and to reflect. Even in a time of struggle, they carried their sacred writings with them, placing words beside weapons, scripture beside sustenance. The fortress, so often remembered for its siege and its silence, was also a place of study, of whispered recitation, of eyes following lines of ink across pale surfaces. The act of reading in such a place must have felt different than in a peaceful town. The horizon stretched empty, the world outside was hostile, and yet within, voices quietly spoke the same words passed down for generations. These scrolls, rolled and unrolled by careful hands, carried comfort across time. They were not simply texts, but companions' guides in solitude, anchors in uncertainty. Yet among the fragments there appeared something unusual. Not every piece fit the expected form of religious scripture. Some carried markings of another kind, geometric symbols, shapes drawn in patterns, triangles, circles, and intersecting lines. These were not the verses of prophets or psalms, but something else entirely. Their meaning remains a mystery. Were they teaching aids, diagrams of architecture or astronomy? Were they personal marks, perhaps a code, or simply a mind passing time with ink and imagination? The discovery of such symbols, intermingled with holy words, gives the scrolls a curious duality. On one hand, they reflect reverence the sacred texts of a people clinging to faith amid trial. On the other hand, they hint at something private, perhaps playful, perhaps profound. It is as though the fortress itself held not only the great voice of tradition, but also the quiet murmur of individuality. To picture someone seated in a chamber, parchment spread before them, ink pot nearby, is to imagine a scene both ordinary and extraordinary. The desert heat outside, the fortress walls standing firm, and within, a hand slowly tracing letters, careful to preserve the sacred, perhaps distracted now and then by the urge to draw. Circles become spirals, lines cross in symmetry. The ink dries, and meaning is left for others to puzzle over. These fragments, sacred and strange, now rest in museums, protected under glass. Visitors who lean close see not only the words of Scripture, but also the faint marks of geometry. The letters connect them to an ancient tradition. The shapes connect them to a mystery, unsolved and open-ended. Both together whisper of the complexity of life at Masada, a mixture of devotion and curiosity, solemnity and private wonder. If you allow yourself to imagine further, you can almost feel the hush of that chamber. Lamps flicker on stone walls. A scroll lies open. Someone bends over it, lips moving soundlessly as they follow the text. Outside, the desert night hums with wind, but inside there is only quiet concentration. It is a moment of stillness, preserved somehow in parchment, carried through centuries. To study in such solitude is to become part of the fortress itself. The scrolls echo the stone. Both are strong, both endure, though in different ways. The stone endures by sheer weight and presence, while the parchment endures by meaning, by the persistence of words. Together they create a balanced body and spirit, fortress and faith, silence and study. The geometric symbols remain the softer voice in this balance. They do not speak clearly, but they suggest. Perhaps they were guides to the stars, pointing to constellations once visible above the desert. Perhaps they were sketches for structures, an attempt to imagine building in a harsh land. Or perhaps they were nothing more than idle doodles, a mind drifting during moments of study, leaving behind lines that centuries later became a riddle. Whatever their purpose, they now offer a gentle reminder. Life is rarely only one thing. It is devotion and distraction, faith and curiosity, survival and imagination. The scrolls at Masada embody this truth. As layers of meaning pressed into parchment. As you linger with the thought of these scrolls, your mind drifts slowly. The letters, steady and rhythmic, become like waves. The shapes, looping and circling, become like patterns of wind in the sand. Together they lull the imagination into calm, a reminder that even in times of tension, there was space for quiet reading, for silent thought, for the simple act of drawing shapes on a page. In this way, the scrolls are not relics of tragedy, but of humanity. They show that even surrounded by stone and siege, people carried with them their inner worlds of scripture, of geometry, of thought. To remember them now is to touch those inner worlds across time, gently, like turning the page of a book in candlelight. Masada carries both the heaviness of history and the light touch of memory. Within its stone walls, fragile scrolls endured ink upon parchment, surviving where armies could not. They remind us that strength is not always in walls or weapons, but in words that drift softly through time. Across centuries, their whispers reach us still, quiet companions for our own listening beneath the vast desert sky. You wander deeper into the fortress, and the sound of your steps becomes softer as the ground evens out into wide stone floors. These spaces, once busy with the rhythm of daily work, now lie in stillness. The chambers of Masada, large and echoing, are no longer filled with grain, jars, or voices. What remains are the foundation's broad rectangles of stone, open to the desert wind, outlines of rooms that once sheltered life in the time of the fortress. These storage halls served as vital lifelines. Their walls rose high, protecting supplies of grain, oil, and wine. Shelves and jars lined the chambers, and people moved carefully through them, keeping track of the food that could sustain hundreds during long months of isolation. It is said that the reserves were so well managed that even after years of resistance, stores remained plentiful. The presence of such halls told both enemies and allies that those inside Masada were not easily broken. Today, however, when you stand in these same spaces, you feel the absence more than the presence. The walls are low and broken, the roofs long since fallen. What was once a bustling network of storerooms is now a series of open rectangles where the desert breathes freely. The wind slips through, carrying with it the sound of emptiness, a kind of quiet that feels at once peaceful and haunting. You might even joke that the place has more drafts than a student's unfinished essay. Among the ruins, archaeologists have uncovered jars, broken and scattered, their fragments lying like pieces of a puzzle that will never be fully solved. Within some vessels, traces of plant remains have been found, tiny fragments of stalks and seeds, pressed by time into delicate remnants. Curiously, some of these remains belong to no species that scholars can confidently identify. They are not the common grains or fruits known from the region. Instead, they appear to belong to plants that are either rare, long extinct, or simply too altered by time to be recognized. This mystery has led to quiet speculation. Were these fragments remnants of some forgotten crop, cultivated briefly and lost? Were they plants gathered from far away, carried in by travelers who climbed the desert plateau? Or were they offerings, perhaps tokens placed in jars, for reasons we can no longer trace? The answer remains hidden, carried only in the whispers of the wind that passes through these empty rooms. To picture these halls in their prime, you must see them as they once breathed with purpose. Stone walls, plastered smooth, guarded rows of jars sealed with pitch or clay, each marked with a careful hand. Figures moved steadily among them, tallying grain, weighing oil, arranging herbs, preparing for the long wait of siege. The air carried mingled scents: earthy grain, sharp herbs, sweet wine. In a corner, a lantern glowed, its light trembling on stone, shadows shifting as if the walls themselves remembered. And yet, when you return your gaze to the present, you find only the wide desert sky above, and the wind's playful fingers brushing across the open floors. These chambers are no longer heavy with stored goods. They are light and open, filled only with shifting air and the occasional bird passing through. The silence is so complete that even a small sound, a pebble rolling, a footstep echoing, seems larger than life. The emptiness becomes a kind of music, a slow and patient tune carried by the desert. Sometimes, when the wind moves at the right angle, you can hear it whistle softly between the stones. It feels almost as though the fortress itself is sighing, releasing the memory of the many lives once sheltered here. The sound can remind you of a distant flute or of someone humming in another room. If you close your eyes, you might even trick yourself into believing that the voices of the past are still lingering here, murmuring faintly across time. The curious plant remains found in those jars, add a quiet strangeness to the scene. They are evidence that life at Masada was more varied than simple survival. Perhaps someone experimented with rare herbs. Perhaps a healer stored plants for medicine. Or perhaps the jars carried ritual significance. Whatever the explanation, these fragments hint at a side of fortress life that was more intimate, more personal. They remind us that even in times of resistance, people thought not only of fighting, but also of healing, of flavor, of meaning. It is easy to imagine a woman in one of these chambers, carefully pressing dried leaves into a small jar, sealing it for later use. Or perhaps a man, experimenting with seeds from faraway lands, wondering if they might grow in the rocky soil of the plateau. These tiny details, now no more than dust, once carried stories of hope, of curiosity, of care. They reveal that the fortress was not simply a military outpost, but a place where daily life, in all its quiet details, continued. When you stand in one of these empty halls today, your body becomes part of the scale of the place. You feel small against the broad foundations, yet you also feel a kind of closeness to those who once stood where you now stand. The chambers are no longer filled with supplies, but they are filled with echoes. The silence becomes a connection, a bridge across centuries. As the sun sets, shadows stretch long across the stone floors. The air cools, and the wind picks up, weaving between the ruins. You might laugh gently to yourself, thinking that the fortress is now more skilled at storing breezes than storing grain. The thought lingers, light-hearted yet true. These halls have become containers not of food, but of air, not of oil, but of silence. And in that silence, you find calm. The empty spaces no longer feel lonely, but spacious, open, almost welcoming. The fortress whispers to you through its emptiness. Here, even without walls or roofs, life once endured. And though the supplies are gone, the memory remains sealed, not in jars, but in the very air that still moves through Masada's halls. You step beyond the walls of Masada in your imagination and drift slowly across the dusty plain that stretches at the base of the plateau. The ground here is flat and pale, marked by geometric shapes that are surprisingly clear even after nearly 2,000 years. They are the remnants of the Roman encampment. The 8 square camps built with precision and discipline, standing in perfect formation, like quiet guardians around the fortress. The Romans left a signature in the landscape that time could not erase. From above, you would see the squares etched into the desert, their outlines stark against the softer curves of sand and stone. Each camp followed the standard Roman design: straight walls, organized interior, entrances aligned with military logic. It is as though the earth itself still carries the memory of their presence, holding on to the geometry long after the soldiers departed. These camps were once alive with activity. Fires burned in neat rows, soldiers sharpened weapons, and officers walked between tents. Horses whinnied softly in the evening air, and carts creaked as they carried supplies. The soundscape of the Roman encampment would have been one of steady movement, not hurried but purposeful, each action a thread in the fabric of siege life. Now, when you stand there, you hear only the wind brushing over the sand, as if it is rehearsing the faint rhythm of footsteps long faded. The scale of the encampment tells you much about the determination of Rome. 8 square camps, linked by a wall of circumvallation, a great ring built to contain Masada. The soldiers who lived here carried with them the discipline of an empire that valued order above all. Each camp had its place in the pattern, like notes in a measured song. The desert became a grid, drawn not by chance, but by rule. And yet, amidst this clarity of design, there are mysteries. Scattered near the camps, archaeologists found small fire pits, irregular in placement, not aligned with the Roman pattern. These pits sit outside the usual boundaries, as though they were made apart from the main life of the encampment. Their purpose remains unknown. Some suggest they were used for cooking by auxiliary units or scouts. Others imagine rituals, private gatherings beyond the order of the camp. Still others wonder if they belonged not to Romans, but to local people who lingered on the edges of the siege. The sight of these unexplained fire pits adds a note of quiet wonder to the scene. They are reminders that even in the most rigid systems, there are elements that escape explanation. You picture the flames flickering in the night, warming hands that remain nameless. Perhaps laughter once rose softly from those fires, or songs hummed to pass the long hours. The mystery does not disturb the peace of the encampment. Rather, it enriches it, giving the past a layer of human presence that will never be fully revealed as evening falls in your vision. The Roman camps glow with torchlight. The air cools, and smoke curls into the sky in faint ribbons. The soldiers sit in groups, eating their rations of grain, cheese, and dried meat. Some mend sandals, others polish armor. The quiet murmur of voices blends with the crackle of firewood. This is not the clamor of battle, but the soft background of waiting. The camps embody patience, the long endurance of an empire pressing its will upon the desert. From Masada's heights, those inside the fortress would have seen the grid of lights stretching across the dark plain, each camp a glowing square. The sight must have been both impressive and unsettling, like looking out over a giant chessboard where the pieces move slowly, inevitably. And yet, from your perspective now, the image feels less threatening and more like a scene of order in the wilderness. An ancient pattern of light against the vast openness of night, walking among the remains today. You find stones still marking the outlines of walls. The earth is faintly raised where soldiers once built ramparts. You could almost imagine the crunch of sandals on gravel, the measured call of a centurion drilling his men. Yet all is silent. The desert has reclaimed the camps, turning them into quiet monuments. The air here feels open, wide, and steady, as though the discipline of the Roman army lingers in the stillness of the landscape. The unknown fire pits sit like questions left behind. Small circles of blackened earth, half filled with sand. You lean closer, and you see only ash and stone, nothing to tell their story. Perhaps that is the beauty of them. They remain silent, leaving space for imagination. You smile lightly at the thought that even the Romans, masters of order, left mysteries for later ages to puzzle over proof that not everything can be neatly squared away. When the moon rises over the plateau, the outline of the encampments becomes even clearer. The silver light touches the edges of the squares, highlighting their geometry against the dark desert. The camps seem almost drawn anew, like chalk lines on a vast canvas. The sight is calming, a reminder that even the passage of centuries cannot erase patterns so carefully made. The Romans may be gone, but their quiet order remains. Etched into the stillness, you draw a slow breath, letting the desert air settle deep within your chest. The encampment, once alive with soldiers and steel, now shelters only the patience of the earth, its quiet endurance etched in form. 8 squares remain, still and solemn, embraced by the wind's soft murmur. As you linger, their measured order seems to breathe with you, steady and unhurried. In this calm geometry, silence gathers like a gentle hand, and the place itself extends an unspoken invitation to rest. The Roman encampment, once alive with fire and command, has become part of the quiet desert night. Its outlines remind you of the balance between power and time, order and silence. And in the mystery of those small fire pits, you are reminded that even in the most certain histories, there is room for wonder. The night before the wall gave way, the fortress of Masada still stood proud against the desert sky. Its ramparts, tall and rugged, had withstood months of pressure, months of waiting. Yet the air now carried a different weight, a tension like the pause before thunder. Inside, the defenders watched the horizon, where sparks of fire flared against the darkness. Tiny glimmers of the Roman siege engines at work. The Romans had brought their machines, catapults, and stone throwers. Engines of war that hurled boulders with relentless force. By day, the desert echoed with the thud of stone striking wall, each impact sending dust spiraling into the hot air. By night, flames were loosed, jars of burning pitch or bundles of firewood launched high, arcing like cruel stars before bursting against the fortress walls. The defenders must have stood in silence, listening to the cracks, watching the fire trace lines across stone dot slowly. Inevitably, the walls began to yield. The fortress that Herod had built with such ambition, the fortress that had sheltered the Zealots with such fierce hope, now trembled under the constant assault. The sound was not sudden, it was gradual, drawn out over long hours, a deep groan of stone under stress, a low crumble that seemed to sigh across the desert. The Romans had also raised the great assault ramp, a slope of stone and dust pressed against the western wall. From its height, they rolled forward the siege tower, its wooden frame bristling with fire and iron. At its top sat the battering ram, a massive beam wrapped in metal, swung by chains, ready to break through what catapults and flames had weakened. Each swing of the ram struck the wall with heavy rhythm, like the beating of an enormous drum. The sound echoed both inside and outside the fortress, a dreadful reminder that time was running thin. Archaeologists today still puzzle over the burn marks that stretch across parts of Masada's walls. They are too extensive, too consuming, as though a fire larger than strategy had swept across the stone. Was it the Romans' firepots that ignited something unexpected? Was it fuel or wood stored within the walls that caught flame? Or was it an accident of the dry desert wind, fanning sparks into an uncontrollable blaze? The marks remain, dark stains on pale rock, their story half told. For those inside the fortress, the flames must have seemed alive, crawling along stone, reaching higher than intended. Imagine standing in those chambers, feeling the heat press inward, the air growing dry and thin, the walls themselves glowing faintly as fire licked them. Historians still wonder how the defenders felt during those final hours, whether fear tightened their throats, or whether resignation settled over them like dust. Did they whisper prayers into the night? Did they sing to drown the sound of the ram? Or did they stand in silence, listening to the inevitable? The collapse itself was not a sudden roar, but a sequence of breaking, of crumbling stone giving way. First a crack, sharp and echoing. Then another, deeper, as weight shifted and walls leaned. Dust rose in pale clouds, filling lungs and stinging eyes. Finally, sections of masonry folded inward, heavy blocks crashing against one another, until the proud wall lay fractured, half standing, half fallen. Through the gap, the night sky appeared like an open wound, and beyond it, the Romans waited dot from the Roman perspective. It was the culmination of patient work. The engines had done their task. The fire had softened the fortress. The ram had struck true. Yet even in their triumph, there must have been awe. To watch such a great wall collapse, to see stone surrender to fire and force, was to witness more than victory. It was to witness the undoing of a dream. Carved into the desert rock dot, the defenders retreated inward, away from the broken section. Their sanctuary was pierced, their circle broken. But still they endured for those last hours, holding their silence while the desert night pressed close. The ruins smoked, carrying the sharp smell of burnt wood and scorched limestone. The air shimmered with heat long after the flames dimmed, as though the stones themselves still breathed fire. Today, when you walk among the remains, you see the traces. Blackened streaks crawl across pale surfaces. Stones cracked not only by the weight of centuries, but by the sudden heat of that long-ago night. You pause, touching the rough edges, and you feel both the strength of the wall and the fragility that fire revealed. It is as though Masada itself remembers the moment it gave way, holding the scars openly against the sky. The burn marks, still etched into the stones, speak in quiet riddles. Some claim they show where tar and pitch once clung, where the flames of Roman assault burned their fiercest. Others whisper of a fire set from within, perhaps an act of desperation to leave nothing for the enemy. Yet the pattern of blackened stone does not follow the neat logic of siege or strategy. It spreads too far, curving strangely, as though the fire itself chose its own path. That mystery lingers unanswered, a secret the desert prefers to keep taut as twilight deepens. You can almost hear the echoes of those final hours. The rhythmic pounding of the Ramang ram, the crackle of fire leaping across walls, the grinding collapse of stone yielding at last, and then the sudden weight of silence. The Roman legions stood poised beyond the breach, their camps glowing in the night. Inside, the Zealots gathered, their shield of stone broken. What filled the air was not visible in ash or rubble, but in the invisible heaviness of fear, sorrow, and defiance. You close your eyes and stand within that moment, beneath smoke-dimmed stars, feeling history's weight pressing close. The slow collapse of Masada's walls was not only a military event. It was a turning point in a story of endurance and will. It marked the beginning of the end, the moment when the fortress shifted from haven to tomb. And though centuries have passed, the scars of fire and stone still tell the tale, a quiet reminder of fragility within strength. Inside the fortress, after the walls had given way, silence settled with a weight heavier than stone. The fires from the Roman assault still glowed faintly on the horizon, but within Masada, time slowed. Dust drifted in long ribbons through the broken corridors, softening the air as if the desert itself wished to hush what came next. It is here that the historian Josephus, writing years later, tells us of the decision taken by the Zealot leaders. According to his account, they faced a choice no one wished to imagine: surrender, with its humiliation and chains, or a pact that would ensure freedom of another kind. They chose, he says, to deny their conquerors. Rather than submit to Rome, they resolved to leave life behind on their own terms. It is a story that lingers like a whisper across the plateau, one that still stirs wonder each time it is retold. Josephus describes Eleazar ben Yair, the leader of the group, addressing his people with words both calm and resolute. He is said to have urged them toward what he called the nobler path, to embrace death as an escape from slavery. And whether his speech was truly given or shaped later by the historian's pen, its echoes ring through history. The idea of a quiet pact, one shared silently among families, friends, and children, is difficult to imagine. Yet Josephus leaves us no other tale. Archaeological traces lend their own quiet confirmation. Among the fragments unearthed in Masada, small pottery shards appear, each inscribed with a name. These are thought to have been lots, drawn by the men chosen for the final duty. The marks are simple, rough letters carved into clay, yet they carry immense weight. To hold one of those fragments today is to feel a breath from that night, as though the hand that once drew, it still trembles across time. The use of lots is a mystery all its own. Were they meant to decide who would act as the final hand? Who would remain last to carry out the grim pact before falling on his own blade? The shards suggest a ritual of fairness, a structure to what might otherwise have been chaos. In their silence, they speak of a people who wished, even in their ending, to honor order, to honor choice. Imagine the scene as night deepened. The chambers of Masada, once filled with laughter of families, the clatter of jars, the rhythm of daily life, now hushed into stillness. The glow of lamps flickered against walls that bore scars of fire. Mothers gathered children close, men stood in clusters, elders leaned quietly on staffs. Words were few, perhaps only whispered prayers or fragments of psalms. The desert outside lay vast and unmoving, the stars above unblinking. The decision, once spoken, could not be taken back. Yet perhaps it was not marked by outcry or fear. Josephus suggests it was met with solemn resolve, a kind of acceptance born of long resistance. For years they had held out against Rome, and now, with walls broken and legions waiting, the end came not with chains, but with a whisper. What feelings passed through them in those hours? Was there peace in the thought of denying Rome a victory? Or sorrow too heavy to voice, the quiet ache of leaving a life so fiercely guarded? Some may have turned inward, closing their eyes against the torchlight, listening only to the wind moving through the fortress halls. Others may have watched the horizon, where the enemy fires burned like watchful stars, and let the sight steady their resolve. The Gospels of stone and shard reveal little else. We do not know the exact steps of that night, nor the precise sequence of events. All we have are the words of Josephus and the fragments of pottery. Yet from these a picture forms, one not of violence or outcry, but of stillness. A pact agreed upon in silence, carried out with ritual calm, as though they sought to weave order even into the unweaving of life. Among the more haunting discoveries are those lots inscribed with names. They are not merely relics. They are voices caught in clay. To run a finger across the etched letters is to brush against a decision older than empires, older than the desert winds. It is to feel the weight of a moment when choice itself became an act of resistance. The story remains filled with mystery. Some scholars wonder if Josephus exaggerated, crafting a tale to suit his Roman audience. Others believe the pact was real, a solemn act etched not only in pottery shards, but in the very silence that still lingers at Masada. Some historians still debate whether the details were as Josephus described, a phrase that continues to haunt the study of this place. Yet the persistence of the story, and the artifacts that lean toward its truth, keep the quiet pact alive in memory. For those who visit Masada today, the plateau holds a strange tranquility. Walking among the ruins, one feels the absence as much as the presence. The stones seem to murmur, the air seems to pause. It is as if the fortress itself remembers the night its people chose silence over surrender. The wind glides through the empty chambers, carrying with it a resonance that is neither mournful nor triumphant, but something softer, almost dreamlike in that dreamlike silence. One may sense the outlines of families gathered together, of leaders whispering final words, of hands drawing lots on fragments of pottery. One may imagine the flicker of torches, the shifting of shadows against walls already darkened by flame. And in the vast desert beyond, the Romans waited, unaware of the pact unfolding in quiet chambers above them. The quiet pact was more than a refusal to surrender. It was a declaration written not on paper, but in action, in silence, in clay. It was a final thread of control in a world that had stripped them of choices. And though centuries have passed, the story endures, like the stars above Masada, that night unfading, distant, but always there for those who look. When the last voices faded from Masada, the desert returned to silence. Yet even in silence, the fortress kept its memory. For centuries it lay untouched, the walls weathered by wind, the chambers hollowed by time. And when archaeologists finally brushed away the dust, what they found was not only stone and ash, but the small, fragile tokens of lives once lived. Among the ruins were combs carved from wood, their teeth still fine and delicate, despite the weight of centuries. To hold one now is to imagine gentle motions in the stillness, someone sitting near a lamp, drawing the comb slowly through hair, the soft scratch against the scalp, the ordinary rhythm of care. Such a gesture, repeated night after night, feels distant, yet intimately human. Silver rings were uncovered too, some plain and smooth, others set with tiny stones that glimmer faintly, even today. A ring speaks of promises, perhaps a marriage, perhaps a bond between kin or friends. On some of these rings, the shapes etched into metal tell of symbols not easily explained. Swirls and lines that do not match the traditional patterns of Jewish design, as though another hand, another culture, once guided the craftsman's tool. Were these tokens carried in trade? Were they gifts exchanged long before the siege? Or did they carry meanings now lost to time, talismans against fate? Small jars and fragments of pottery lay scattered in chambers. Some still bore traces of pigment, the faint blush of red, the fading wash of blue. A child's hand may once have touched these, tracing the colors while sitting in the cool shade of stone. For though Masada is remembered for defiance and death, it was also a place of life, where children played, where women prepared bread, where men studied by lamplight. Each shard of pottery hummed softly, with that forgotten rhythm. Needles of bone, smoothed and sharpened, were found near what may have been living quarters. They suggest hands sewing cloth, repairing garments, keeping life ordered even as the siege wore on outside. The simple act of stitching a seam under dim light, pulling thread through fabric, is a quiet reminder that ordinary days persisted within. Extraordinary times, dot among the most mysterious discoveries, are the pieces of jewelry bearing unfamiliar marks. Tiny pendants with circles, cross-like shapes, or patterns that do not align with Hebrew iconography. Some scholars suggest they may have come from neighboring cultures Nabatean, perhaps, or even further afield. Others wonder if they carried personal significance, talismans against fear, or tokens of memory carried from distant homelands. Their presence in Masada's chambers adds layers of mystery, as though the people within were connected to a wider web of lives and influences. These objects, though small, resist silence. They whisper of individual stories that history did not record. The man who wore a silver ring, the woman who combed her hair by lamplight, the child who touched painted pottery. None of their names survive in chronicles, yet their belongings endure, anchoring them in the landscape of memory. It is striking to imagine how these tokens survived while so much else was lost. Fire licked the walls, stone collapsed, centuries of wind swept across the plateau, yet within the dust, a comb, a ring, a fragment of painted clay endured. Each piece carries a resilience that mirrors the spirit of those who once lived here. The fortress itself may feel monumental, its towers and walls grand against the desert, but these smaller finds draw us closer. They remind us that history is not only made of battles and decisions, but of gestures of brushing hair, of clasping a ring, of sewing cloth. They remind us that behind the story of defiance lay families, individuals, people who carried tokens of comfort into a place of trial. There is a tenderness in thinking about these objects. The comb, once pulled through dark hair now long gone. The ring, once warm on a finger, exchanged in a moment of affection. The pendant, once tucked against the skin as protection or prayer. They are echoes of touch, echoes of presence, delicate but enduring. The desert has a way of preserving what other lands would have lost. Its dry air, its stillness, its silence, all combine to keep the fragile intact. Without that silence, perhaps the cone would have crumbled, the ring tarnished beyond recognition, the painted jar dissolved to dust. Yet Masada's stillness guarded them, holding them until they could be found, even now. When displayed in museums or studied under bright light, these tokens hold something private, as though they belong more to the night and the desert than to glass cases. They seem to ask for quiet, for slow contemplation, for remembrance without intrusion. To look at them is to feel a gentle pull toward the lives they represent, toward the humanity within the legend. The mysterious symbols on some pieces continue to puzzle scholars. Were they traces of trade, evidence of cultural exchange? Or were they personal inventions, marks of identity carved by hands we cannot name? The possibility that Masada held such diversity adds to its complexity. It was not only a fortress of resistance, but perhaps also a meeting point of traditions, where tokens from far-off places mingled with local craft, standing among the ruins. One might imagine these objects in use, the ring glinting in sunlight, the comb resting on a ledge, the pendant pressed against someone's chest as they whispered a prayer. These images soften the heavy tale of siege, filling it with moments of quiet humanity. They turn legend into life, myth into memory. The tokens left behind are more than artifacts. They are bridges. They carry us back not through grand speeches or recorded chronicles, but through the weight of ordinary days. They remind us that the people of Masada were not only figures in a tragedy, but men, women, and children whose small belongings carried stories of care, beauty, and mystery. And so the fortress speaks not only through its walls, but through its combs, its rings, its fragments of clay. Through each token left behind, we hear the quiet echo of lives once lived, still whispering in the desert wind. When the Romans finally broke through Masada's walls, they found no clash of steel, no arrows, no cries of resistance. Instead, silence met them, strange, heavy, unsettling. Boots struck stone, their echoes swallowed by the desert wind drifting through empty halls. The hardened soldiers of the 10th Legion, long accustomed to the roar of battle, slowed their steps, uneasy, as though unseen hands pressed upon their armor, making each breath feel weighted, that everywhere their eyes fell were bodies. Men lay beside women, children rested in the arms of mothers, families gathered in death as they had in life. These defenders had chosen not to be taken. Their final act defied the ordinary patterns of war. Victory here did not thunder. It whispered in eerie quiet. Even the stones seemed to mourn. Imagine yourself entering those chambers, each step measured, each breath caught in your throat, afraid to disturb the silence that has clung there. For centuries, the rooms where daily life once thrived now appeared as tombs. Ash darkened the floors, black scars streaked the walls, and remnants of collapsed beams lay abandoned in corners. The Romans moved cautiously through this strange graveyard of stone. Some muttered invocations to their gods, others touched charms or gestured for protection. Silence unsettles even the strongest of hearts, and here it pressed on them with unrelenting force. Sandals struck stone, their echoes fading too quickly, as if the fortress itself insisted on preserving its hush. Josephus would later record the shock. The Romans had anticipated one final struggle, perhaps a bloody clash that would secure their triumph. Instead, they met with death already chosen, a collective refusal to surrender. Masada's silence would echo far beyond its plateau, transforming into symbol and story. But for the soldiers who first stepped into those lifeless halls, it was no symbol at all. It was simply weight strange, oppressive, and indescribable. Centuries later, archaeologists uncovered mysteries hidden in the ash. They found circles of animal bones, arranged with curious precision. Were they the remnants of ritual, offerings to ward off despair in the final hours? Or were they merely fragments of meals, given meaning only by the patterns time preserved? The circles are too deliberate to dismiss. You picture hands laying them down carefully, a gesture accompanied perhaps by whispered prayer. What words might have filled that silence? A plea, a hope, a surrender? The truth resists explanation, folded into the desert's unbroken quiet. Silence itself was not empty here. At Masada, it held memory, presence, and the sharp awareness of lives extinguished only moments before. Roman banners fluttered, their fabrics snapping harshly against the quiet air. Sunlight glinted on shields, too bright, almost intrusive, as though light itself disturbed the subdued stillness. Victory had been won, but it must have tasted bitter, like water drawn from a brackish well. Within storerooms, jars of grain and oil remained intact, supplies untouched. Weapons leaned unused against walls, mute companions of those who had chosen not to wield them. The contrast jarred, abundance and readiness alongside absence and finality. Picture yourself there, in such a chamber. A sealed jar rests at your feet. Your hand touches stone cool from the night. Around you, silence vibrates softly, as though the very air remembers. Silence in Masada was not only something heard, it was also seen. Movement was absent, daily rhythm frozen. Rooms stood suspended in mid-task, perhaps a spindle half wound with thread, a cooking pot upright, but blackened with fire. Such fragments amplify the sense of interruption. Each room became a tableau of unfinished lives, rhythms broken in an instant. For Romans used to chaos the shouted orders, the clash of steel, the press of battle. This hush must have felt alien. Even their voices sounded wrong, too sharp in the air. One imagines them lowering their tones, compelled by the silence to tread slowly, reverently, as though within a temple. The fortress, once a bastion of defiance, had become instead a sanctuary of absence. Its walls were now sacred in their quiet. More than strategic dot, the silence extended outward, across the desert itself. From Masada's heights the Dead Sea shimmered in stillness, its waters unmoved by grief. The cliffs stood mute, their ridges reflecting sunlight with indifferent calm. Nature did not mourn as humans do, yet the vast calm of earth and sky seemed to echo the hush within the fortress. You lean on a wall, gaze across the horizon, and the silence stretches, endless. Later archaeologists, retracing those Roman steps, felt the same press of quiet. Silence does not fade with centuries. It clings to stone, woven into the memory of place. Visitors speak of rooms where even whispers feel intrusive, where footsteps echo too harshly, breaking an atmosphere that resists sound. At Masada, silence itself is history, its presence more enduring than stone. The circles of bones add to this atmosphere. Whether ritual or accident, their arrangement unsettles gently, hinting at stories left untold. Some mysteries belong only to those who live them, and Masada resists giving them away. Its silence keeps watch, preserving secrets beyond reach. The Romans left garrisons, but life never truly returned. The fortress no longer rang with laughter or daily labor. Silence became its inhabitant, wind weaving through its ruins, like a low song that never ceases. To imagine Masada today is to see not just stone in ruin, but the memory of that day when silence replaced struggle. Jars untouched, walls blackened by fire, bones laid in careful circles, these remain as reminders. Above them all, the wind carries its endless voice, soft and distant. Masada's silence does not belong only to the past. It continues in the present, pressing gently on every visitor who walks the plateau. It reminds us that some victories are measured not by noise, but by absence. The silence that fell with Rome's entry still lingers, unbroken, a companion across centuries. And so Masada teaches us, silence can be as powerful as speech, as heavy as battle. It can hold grief without gesture, memory without words, mystery without explanation. To walk its ruins is to listen not for sound, but for quiet itself, the deep, steady silence that has endured here since that long-ago day. Centuries after the desert winds first swept silence across Masada's plateau, the fortress began to live again in memory. Its stones, once left to crumble under sun and dust, became more than ruins. They became a symbol at once historical and mythical, fragile and enduring. In modern Jewish history, Masada has come to stand as a testament to resistance, sacrifice, and the unyielding determination to preserve identity. From the moment archaeologists brushed sand from storerooms and walls, Masada shifted from being a forgotten relic to a living emblem carried forward in national consciousness. The story of Masada is preserved most vividly through the writings of Flavius Josephus, who described it as the last refuge of Jewish rebels after Jerusalem's fall. For centuries, his tale lived somewhere between history and legend, carrying themes of resistance and sacrifice. In the 20th century, after the birth of Israel, Masada's meaning deepened, transforming into a national symbol. On its plateau, soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces once swore an oath, "Masada shall not fall again." You picture the ceremony, torches burning, flags whipping in the desert wind, young recruits pledging themselves to memory and survival. And yet, even as Masada rose into national myth, questions grew louder. Scholars examining Josephus's account noticed troubling inconsistencies. Was the mass suicide truly possible in the way he described? Could hundreds of men, women, and children have carried out such an act with order, discipline, and unity? Archaeology offered tantalizing fragments, pottery shards inscribed with names, possibly used to draw lots. Human remains in caves that hinted at tragedy. But the numbers did not always match the story. Some bones belonged to fewer people than Josephus claimed. Others showed signs of scattering that suggested later disturbance. The evidence left scholars hesitant, uncertain whether Josephus recorded history or crafted a narrative with moral and political aims. This tension between symbol and fact lies at the heart of Masada's legacy. For many, the exact truth matters less than the meaning. Masada represents refusal to surrender, the belief that identity and dignity can be preserved even in the face of annihilation. The fortress became an emblem of choosing freedom over enslavement, values over survival. Yet others argue that clinging too tightly to symbol risks oversimplifying history. Josephus himself, after all, described the Zealots not only as defenders, but also as extremists who had turned violence against fellow Jews in Jerusalem. If the defenders were not purely heroic, does that alter the meaning of their final stand? Or does Masada still transcend the flaws of those who held it? Standing atop Masada today, the debate hovers in the air like the shimmering heat rising from stone. Guides recount Josephus's words with solemn rhythm, their voices mingling with the sigh of desert wind. Tourists gaze outward, imagining Roman camps arrayed in squares across the sands below. Some feel pride swell, an unbroken line of courage stretching from ancient rebels to modern identity. Others feel unease, aware of unanswered questions, of the possibility that myth has entwined itself too closely with fact. Perhaps the truth of Masada's power lies in both its ambiguity and its clarity. It is ambiguous in detail. Who exactly died, how events unfolded, whether Josephus can be trusted. But it is clear in impression, a story of choice, of last defiance, of silence transfigured into meaning. In this way, Masada is both history and myth, and it may be myth more than fact. That nations cling to most powerfully. Archaeology complicates and enriches the picture. Excavations reveal traces of daily life: sandals, combs, cooking pots, jars lined with grain dust. These fragments speak of families, of children who played, of meals once shared in courtyards. They humanize the rebels beyond the final act of defiance. Yet they also deepen the riddle. Some skeletal remains resist neat categorization. Were they rebels, Romans? Later intruders? The material evidence refuses to close the case. Some scholars suggest Josephus may have written with intent shaped by circumstance. Living under Roman patronage, he may have sought to balance dignity with submission, honoring Jewish resistance while affirming Rome's inevitability. By portraying the rebels as brave but doomed, choosing death over capture, he gave his people honor in defeat while underscoring Rome's unstoppable might. In this reading, Masada is not simply history, it is narrative, layered with political and moral purpose. Still, symbols thrive in places where facts blur. In the shadow of the Holocaust, Masada became more than a story of antiquity. It became a vow of survival, a reminder that submission is never the only path. For modern Israel, The phrase, Masada shall not fall again, resonated not only with the cliffs of the Dead Sea, but with the determination to preserve existence itself. You imagine recruits gathered at dawn on the plateau. The sun rises over the Jordanian hills, gilding the water below. A commander invokes the courage of the defenders. Voices rise in response, steady and deliberate. In that moment, Masada is no ruin. It is a living ground of memory and identity. And yet the silence of doubt persists. Scholars debate in journals and conferences. Did Josephus exaggerate? Was mass suicide logistically possible? Were the Ostraka truly Lots, or something else entirely? Some suggest only a small group chose death, while others were taken captive. The answers remain elusive. Thus, Masada stands at a crossroads between memory and evidence. For those who seek inspiration, it is a beacon. For those who seek certainty, it is a riddle. The stones offer no resolution, only the vast desert stretching outward, the stillness of the Dead Sea shimmering below. The silence of Masada continues to speak, but always in whispers, shaped by the listener's ear. Perhaps that is its enduring power. A ruin that became a monument, a tragedy that became a vow. Whether Josephus wrote truth or crafted myth, the impact of his words is undeniable. Masada endures in Jewish consciousness as a place where defiance reached its height, where silence was transformed into meaning. To walk its plateau is to feel history not only in stone, but in atmosphere, the weight of silence pressing across centuries, reminding us that sometimes the most enduring voices are those that never spoke. The desert night returns, wrapping Masada in a veil of calm. Beneath the vast sky, the plateau breathes in silence. Centuries of history rest beneath the stones, yet the present is no less powerful. Today, Masada is no longer a fortress of desperation, but a heritage site, protected and preserved. Recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it draws thousands each year. Travelers climb the winding snake path at dawn or glide upward by cable car, their footsteps tracing lines of memory across the ancient stone. What they find is not only history, but atmosphere. The vast stillness of the Judean desert stretches out in every direction. The Dead Sea gleams below, its surface reflecting starlight like glass. In this place, where memory and myth once intertwined with fire and silence, visitors pause to feel the weight of time. Many have spoken of an almost tangible quiet, a silence so deep that it presses gently on the heart. Some describe standing alone at sunrise, the plateau glowing with the first golden light, and sensing something beyond words, a lingering presence, a solemn hush, a reminder that stories never fully fade. The stars above Masada appear sharper than elsewhere, as if the desert air clears the lens of the world. They hang low, their light scattering over the sand and stone. You imagine lying on the plateau floor, eyes tracing constellations while the ruins outline themselves in shadow. The air is cool, carrying faint whispers of wind through the hollows of the ancient cisterns. From far below, the Dead Sea lies utterly still, its dense waters catching fragments of moonlight. The horizon fades into silence, a line blurred between earth and sky. Among the ruins, the steps of history remain soft. The northern palace, where once Herod gazed outward, is now a quiet terrace open to the stars. Its walls are broken, yet the pattern of stone still suggests grandeur. You picture torches burning here centuries ago, reflected in polished floors, voices murmuring in rooms now empty. Tonight, there is only the sound of air brushing through doorways long surrendered to time. The bathhouses lie silent too, their mosaics faintly glowing in starlight. Once, water steamed in these chambers. Now they are cool hollows filled with memory. The storehouses, once stacked with jars of grain and wine, rest as outlines on the ground, their walls rising barely above the sand. Yet even in ruin, they hold a sense of purpose, a reminder of lives that prepared for both survival and siege back further along the plateau. You pass the synagogue. Its stones, arranged in familiar order, echo with the soft weight of prayers long gone. In the silence of night, you imagine faint voices reciting words from scrolls, a rhythm of devotion carried on the air. The ruins do not answer, yet they feel inhabited, as if memory itself breathes here. The Roman ramp looms in the distance, still pressing against the western wall, its slope of earth and rock frozen in time. By starlight, it seems less an instrument of conquest and more a ridge blending with the desert. What once was a tool of war is now a scar softened by centuries, merging with the stillness. The desert wind passes over it without judgment, smoothing the edges until it becomes part of the landscape. And always, the silence endures. It is not emptiness, but presence, the presence of countless lives that once moved here, of decisions that shaped history, of myths that continue to whisper across centuries. Visitors speak of this silence as heavy, yet it is not threatening. It is a weight that calms, as though the world here has slowed enough to allow one to breathe deeply, unhurriedly. When dawn begins, it arrives slowly. First, the stars dim, retreating into the vastness. The sky above the Dead Sea shifts from black to pale silver, then soft rose. The desert cliffs glow faintly, each ridge outlined in delicate light. On the plateau, the ruins take on new colors, the pale yellow of stone, the warm blush of morning sun. With daylight, Masada becomes a place of footsteps, of voices, of modern visitors. But in the hours of night, beneath the stars, it is a realm of stillness where history rests like a sleeping companion at night. Masada becomes a place of quiet reflection. Its past, whether factual or legendary, whether Josephus's chronicle or a modern emblem, settles softly across the plateau. The stones no longer guard against attack, but stand as witnesses of endurance, carrying memory without demanding certainty. In their presence, visitors are invited to linger, to breathe deeply, and to feel the weight and beauty of silence, where history speaks most gently through stillness. Now, as our story drifts to its end, we leave Masada beneath the fading stars. The desert has grown quiet, and the fortress, once filled with voices of defiance and grief, lies softly under the touch of dawn. You may picture the calm horizon, the first warmth of sunlight brushing over stone, the still waters of the Dead Sea glowing faintly. The silence here is not sorrowful, but peaceful, a silence that carries centuries without weight. In your own space, perhaps you feel the same stillness settle around you. The rhythm of breath, steady and calm, mirrors the endless rhythm of the desert wind. Just as the plateau holds its history without hurry, you too may let go of thoughts, letting them rest for the night. There is no need for answers, only the quiet presence of rest. Masada remains, not only as ruins of stone, but as a gentle reminder that time softens even the harshest stories. That silence can soothe, and that in stillness we find space to dream. Let this story accompany you into sleep, a calm path leading toward deeper rest. Close your eyes and let the desert night enfold you, carrying you gently toward dreams. May your sleep be soft, your spirit at peace, and the dawn greet you with the quiet glow that rises each morning over Masada's heights. Good night, and until our paths cross once more, may silence keep you safe.